happy to help with that. So today there's going to be a lot of me talking around and explaining the homeworks. And you can blame the Romans for this one. Okay. Just because we're going to be talking about first off, the Roman Empire was huge. And despite them not having computers, we do have a couple topics that come out from computer science from them, such as the Byzantine generals problem. Although, yes, some of you might argue, is Byzantium really the Roman Empire? Well, they called themselves Romans and thought of themselves as Romans, and they existed until the 1400s, and were very emphatic about the fact they were Roman. Just they happen to speak Greek, I think, as opposed to Latin. But that's a whole different story. But that Byzantium general problem is basically how do you acknowledge the fact that you just sent an order that was not intercepted, and so that you're all going to be coordinating, attacking at the same time. That's a completely different subject. No, we're talking about these two homeworks. So give me a second. So we're going to be talking about the Josephus problem first, which is the base for our first problem. So you probably saw the subtitle, Game of Death in a Circle. So the Josephus problem is named after Flavius Josephus. He was a Jewish historian / warrior / priest living in Judea at the time, Roman Judea. The land is currently Israel, has gone through a lot of name changes over the centuries, being conquered by one empire, and then another, 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 and then another. It is, I mean, if you take a look where basically that area where Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Israel all kind of are, that area is a big crossroads, essentially for multiple continents. So it makes sense that there's a lot of geographical empire building action over in that area. So anyway, you've got during the time of Josephus, okay, that he was born in year 37, as in after year 0, and died around 100. So he was a historian. He wrote down a lot of stuff that was very interesting, and I'll get into that. But at that point, if you remember your Bible studies, for those of you who went to Sunday school as Christians, it was that Judea at the time was occupied by the Romans, and Jews were not particularly happy about this. Okay, so and one of the ways that eventually they showed they were unhappy was by fighting against them in the first Jewish-Roman War, which was a rebellion against the Romans. Now, the rebellions against the Romans, and again, I'm not a big historian. I don't have a history PhD. I don't even specialize in areas about this. So I'm painting a very broad picture to help tell a story about, so you can remember this problem. Now, rebellions against the Romans is not an uncommon thing, right? You've got famous heroes who in English history who rebelled against Romans. You've got all sorts of stuff. You've got a large empire, you're going to get rebellions. Basically, it's the way it goes, especially in those days when communication and travel times were kind of not great. So rebellions against the Romans weren't very unusual, nor was the outcome of the Jewish rebellion against the Romans, which is that the rebellion was completely and utterly crushed, which is the way that rebellions go against the Romans. So Josephus was the leader of a war band at the time, and in the year 67, he surrendered after being sieged. So he and his war band were, and the story goes that he and his war band were surrounded and basically trapped in a cave. And the Romans said, surrender, and we will take you into slavery, which was not that appealing to the Jews there, or the 50 or so there, who said, no. we'd rather die than surrender. And so what they did is that they drew lots and executed each other in turn. Now the method is unknown, but it is the basis for the Josephus problem. And the idea here is the way they executed each other is that they stood in a circle and they started counting off. Live, die, live, die. And every time they said die, that person would die. So basically every other person would die, but it was a circle. It'd keep going around and around until two people were left, is the idea here. Or one person rather. So because it's a circle, you can keep going, right? The circle self-adjusts. You just only count the living people. You just simply remove people from the list and execute them. Yes, it's a very morbid story, but in my defense, it is a Monday. So I imagine what happened is that Josephus and the other guy who was left over, the two of them, they just kind of looked at each other and they looked at the result and they went, well, this was a bloody stupid idea. Let's go surrender to the Romans. And they did. Josephus surrendered to the Romans, and he predicted Vespasian becoming emperor of Rome, which Vespasian made Josephus a slave and interpreter, and not too long after he was granted his freedom, and he fully defected as a Roman citizen and started writing books, very important books, I should mention, because obviously, as a first century historian, he has a lot of biases, but he wrote in the first century. This is kind of a big deal. You don't get a lot of, the literacy rate wasn't exactly super high, so he wrote a number of things: the Jewish War, the Antiquity of the Jews, or against the Greeks, and also an autobiography. So he wrote quite a bit. And this is important because this gives us he gives a lot of kind of direct account of not only Jewish life, but also Roman life, Roman traditions, as well as the early kind of, Christianity at that point that was forming, because Christianity was still a newfangled religion around that point, right? We're talking about first century, there were still centuries before the whole Nicene thing. So, and so that's that's very interesting to historians to kind of see that. But we're interested in his problem here, the Josephus problem. Now, the Josephus problem, solving that Josephus problem, there's a mathematical equation for this, right? Where basically, if every other person is removed from the ring, then you can create a solution for that. You can get a pattern for where you need to stand. So see, that's the problem, which is the Josephus problem says, okay, suppose you're in this whole ring of death thing, but you want to live. Very good assumption there. Where should you stand if you want to live? So that's what the Josephus problem is trying to solve. Okay, yes. I think they just kind of looked at each other, and the idea is that, let's see, they just stopped early. So, and then I think the last two were supposed to off each other or something like that. I don't know. It's morbid, so we'll just move on. The idea here is that basically, where do you want to stand to kind of survive in this game or live in this kind of game? And but we're also assuming that k is equal to 2. In other words, we're removing every other person. But there's a more generalized problem where k is equal to 3, or k is equal to this generic case of if your ring has n people and you're removing every kth person, then your solution as to where to stand is here, which is that's awful looking, right? Fortunately, we can instead what we're going to do is we're going to simulate this with a circular linked list. So the circular linked list, you go around and around with it, and you simply remove, and we can just simply remove people or integers, be it, since I'm not feeling particularly bloodthirsty at the moment. So anyway, we can see this. So let me go over here into assignments, and I will grab it. And okay, where are we? Josephus problem. And I'll have to make sure that the quizzes are put with the appropriate due dates. That's solitaire encryption. That's the other one. Also, believe it or not, tied to the Romans. as everything with encryption is. Seriously, I mean, empire building leads to some serious kind of academic considerations. It's just the way so anyway, you'll be getting this code, the circular linked list code. Here, let me go ahead and save it. Yes, replace it. Yes, open it. Okay, and we've got this Java code here. So the idea here is that for those of you who haven't watched the videos yet, you're dealing with circular linked lists, which are a special type of linked list that I don't go over in the videos. Linked lists are fairly straightforward. They're a new type of list. Linked lists in themselves are good at everything array lists are bad at, and bad at everything array lists are good at, pretty much. So array lists are, if you want to add and remove from either end, linked lists can do that in constant time. If you want to get or set an item at a specific index in the list, it takes O of n time. And I go over this into considerable detail in the videos. But the way it works is that each of your items is scattered throughout. Each of your items is scattered throughout the list. Sorry, it's scattered throughout your memory. Each item in the list is scattered throughout memory using these things called nodes. Now, this is the scariest part about linked lists, which is that it relies off these nodes, which have an item and a node inside of it, if you read it like that. Except that's a lie, that's the wrong way to read it, because it's not a Matryoshka doll, as I mentioned. It's not things nested inside of each other, right? Because the way to read everything, remember, everything in Java except for primitives is a reference to another item. So the node keeps track of where in computer memory the item is and where the next item in the list is. So basically, imagine it's a scavenger hunt, right? Where basically we've got the memory address over here of the next item in the list. So, right, in scavenger hunts, you got to get to some kind of thing. And once you get there, that has the directions on how to get to the next thing. So this is a scavenger hunt, albeit with teleportation, because we can teleport from one memory address to the other. So these can be anywhere in the list. You don't have to reallocate anything. You just build nodes as you need them and discard them as you need them. But it does have some additional considerations, because if you're trying to find any, like specifically step 9, you have to start at step 0 and go all the way to step 9. You can't just jump there like you would jump to index 9 in an array list. Okay, and I go into over this in a lot of detail in these in the videos. So if you haven't watched those yet, please do, but or get to it when you can. So the big thing here is, like, you gotta implement the methods for this, which resemble a lot doing the add and remove methods for the doubly linked lists. Doubly linked lists. So most linked lists are, so linked lists can be singly linked, meaning they keep track of the next item, but they can be doubly linked, meaning they have a link to the previous item as well. For simplicity's sake, we're just dealing with singly linked list here, but the cases that you have to consider to avoid null pointer exceptions are the same cases that you have to consider as the videos I do. So what makes it a circular linked list? Well, circular means that the last item in the list will point to the tail, meaning it's an infinite loop kind of deal. Okay, so the last node, which is the tail, will point to the head, my bad. Will point to the first thing in the list. Okay, so it's kind of just a circular thing where you can go from the last step all the way back to the first step. Which, if we're doing a ring, you can see how that would be useful. Now, this, I've given you almost a whole lot of stuff, including this toString method. This toString method is super useful because it will crash if your add and remove aren't building your linked list correctly. Okay, so if you get a crash on a toString, that's a warning that basically one of your cases messed up. Okay, and the other thing I wrote for you, if you're doing the circular linked list, the Josephus problem. And remember, you have your choice of doing one of two problems. If you do the solitaire encryption, which is more difficult, you get 20 extra credit points. Okay, so we have this iterator. So the circular linked list is iterable, which means that it will create an iterator, which is the thing that is needed to iterate over an item using a for each loop. We aren't going to actually use the for each loop. It's just a useful construct over here. Iterators, So the way it works is basically, let's suppose I add enough items over here. I create a circular linked list, and then I add enough items, right? List.add, 3, sorry, list.add 1. Suppose I create a list like this. Okay, Control C, Control V. Okay, 1, 2. So suppose I create a list like this. Then once I've created the list, I can create an iterator over it, which is like doing a for each loop, but with a bit more manual control. And if I do the following calls, right? Here's my list, 1, 2, 3. If I do the following calls, I can do this. So, it has 3 methods. Has next, which tells me if I have a next item. Next, which tells me get to the next item, and remove, which tells me to remove the last item I just visited. So if I do the following calls, iter.next, and then follow that up with an iter.remove, assuming I can spell, which is, okay, if I do these calls, iter.next will get me to 1, which is the first item, then 2, and then iter.remove will remove the 2 from the list. And then if I call iter.next, it will get me the 3. And then since it's circular, if I call iter.next again, it will bring me all the way back to 1. Make sense? So now the iter.next and iter.remove and all that stuff has already been written for you. The iterator's already, it's all complete, don't need to change it at all. What it does do is that the remove method here does hook into your remove method. It's a particularly interesting bit of coding I actually enjoyed writing because it made me feel very smart. Because it calls the class that it calls the bit of code that you wrote to do that. So the big things to finish here are add and remove. You do not need to get and set if you're doing the Josephus problem, but if you're doing the other problem, you'll probably need to do a get and set, but that's just a copy paste job. Similarly, the get node over here and the circuit and the constructor, also a copy paste job from the source code I give you. So really just the circular linked list class, all you need to focus on is the add and the remove, which is great. All right, so with that, let's go on to Solitaire Encryption, which also uses a circular linked list, right? So if you start the Solitaire Encryption and decide that this problem is terrible, not too much time lost because you did the bulk of it already, which is the add and the remove. You also get a blank Solitaire Encryption, which takes in a letter and a key and encrypts it by that amount, which now necessitates me to talk about keys. All right. So what is the earliest encryption algorithm that we really kind of credit? Anyone? No, that's way too late. Turing is way later for encryption than that's like near the end of the story. What? Yes, Caesar, right? Romans again. Julius Caesar. Okay, so here's the hello world of all. This is hello world for security problems. Let me capitalize it. We typically capitalize every letter in our message in security. Attack at dawn. That's not saying to attack somebody named Dawn. We're saying attack that first morning's light, So I want to deliver this message securely to my fellow generals / army leaders / whatever we call them. Okay. And I want to do so securely, but I don't want it to get intercepted. Now, if it does get intercepted, and I'm a Roman general, that's not necessarily the end of the world. They don't necessarily know because literacy rates are, again, pretty darn low. And not only that, the people I'm fighting against are by definition barbarians, which has not a Roman, it's not a Latin etymology. That's more of a Greek etymology where the Greeks thought of anybody who was not speaking their language as just saying barbar, 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 barbar. So hence barbarian. Ain't kidding here. So anyway, you got barbarians who now they're not speaking Latin, so chances are they can't read your message. But assuming they are able to, well, they could prepare their forces, and that would be and then you'd attack at dawn right into a bunch of arrows, which would not be good. Not good if you want to live an unpunctured life. So I need to make sure that if this message does get intercepted, nobody can read it, right? So the idea here is that Julius, that's credited to Julius Caesar, is that we'll encrypt this message. We'll have a secret way of communicating it, and that's by modulating all of these all these letters forward by 3, A, B, C, D. So my message will now go like this: QRST, U, V, W, C, D, E, F, and so on and so forth, right? So I encrypt my message this way. It gets intercepted. It's a bunch of gibberish. It doesn't get intercepted. It gets to my general. Great. He goes, well, this is a bunch of gibberish, but I know what to do. I got to subtract 3 instead of adding 3. So in that case, that's great. So now, mind you, this method has its weaknesses that I didn't go into over the other class, which is that each language has a fingerprint. Each written language has a fingerprint, because there are only so many. Because, well, language letter frequencies. We have basically every language kind of has a frequency of how often letters get used in their texts. Like, for instance, relative frequency for English, E is used 12%, is basically 12% of all letters that are used in the English language are E, followed by 9% of T. And we see that's 14% in French and 16% in German. So if you have a big enough corpus of text, you can figure out what language it's in. And if the most frequent character is E, then I just have to do a bit of substitution. It doesn't take me too long. So the next kind of step of the game at that point was the Vignere cipher, if I'm recalling correctly, and that was used for a long time. Polyalphabetic, right? The idea here is that we have my attack at dawn, right? What I'm doing is I'm modulating everything by the same amount, which is 3, right? So that only really gives, if anybody knows I'm using the Caesar cipher but doesn't necessarily know what it is, that means that, oh, well, I just have to try 26 different combinations. Well, 25, because the 26 is just reflexive. It turns it an identity. It turns it into itself. But we've got 26. So I just have to do 25 different combinations. Not that strong if I'm changing every single letter the exact same way. So solution, don't change every letter the exact same way. Change every letter slightly differently. Attack at dawn. And now I'm going to use the keyword lemon, and I just simply repeat it as long as I need to. So lemon, lemon, le. So I have a keyword. Everybody knows the keyword, the secret word, right? And the ciphertext over here becomes a lot more ununderstandable, but it does. And so it decrypts this exact same way. And what we do is that we translate each of these letters into numbers again, and we do a bunch of addition, and then that get a modular addition that gets me from 0 to 26 or 0 to 25. So, right, modular addition, because, right, if I do Z plus 2, that will give me ZAB, right? If I do Z plus 1, that will give me A. If I do Y plus 3, it will be ZAB. So, right, so modular arithmetic is kind of important here. But before you start freaking out about modular arithmetic, I've got that implemented for you already in the solitaire encryption in this over here, where I have encrypt letter. Given a letter and a key, it will return what it would be encrypted, and decrypt. Given a letter and a key, it will do the reverse. There's a bit of funky math that goes on over here just because of the way we have to deal with negative values and the modulo operator, which is that it doesn't like modulo negative values. So I just simply do a kind of weird rotation with that as well. Basically, and I'd be happy to go over that with anyone who wants that. But anyway, this is still able to be suffer from certain attacks as well. eventually what we had to do, eventually we moved to, so it was solvable by mathematicians. Just give them any kind of, give them as much food, drink, and cigarettes as they request, send them upstairs, and hope they are able to break the attack order before you figure out that it was an attack order from all the bullets flying at you. But eventually got to the point that machines were built to break stuff, and then machines were built to make stuff, hence the whole Enigma machine built by the Germans, or utilized by the Germans. And then the cracking that was done by Turing's team at Bletchley Field, I think. What was it? Enigma Machine, right? Right. And then the interesting thing about that, which was really interesting, is once you've cracked your enemy's communications and stuff like that, you can't just let them know you've cracked it. If you let them know you crack it, then they'll just build a new one and start using a different process, and they won't give you any information. So you got to make sure you just use the information in just the right way. Oh, there's a submarine there. You can't just send stuff to blow up that submarine. Your aircraft patrols just have to happen across that location randomly, and then you can fire torpedoes at it, giving the veneer of, well, I suppose it's possible they spotted it because they somehow spotted it from the aircraft. You can't let them know that you got it from the code. You can't, once you've broken the code, you can't let them know you've got it. It's because once you've got that advantage, you're able to start taking the initiative. It's kind of amazing. The kind of, if you know what moves other people are making, then it's like playing Stratego, right? Except your pieces are the ones that are hidden from the enemy, but you can see what their pieces are and where all their bombs are laid. It suddenly becomes a much simpler game for you. Okay, but you can't let them know that you can see it. Now but at the end of the day, all these methods, one-time pads, they all rely off of giving different keys to your values. Okay. One-time pads are basically the only way you can properly protect something. By the way, they're the only perfect encryption, because everything else leaves kind of a pattern that can be cracked. One-time pads don't, because by definition, they're random numbers that are used exactly once to generate right is your random numbers, left is your key. So how to encrypt your message? Basically you've got pads, you scratch off each letter as you use them, and you send it to your compatriot who has the only other copy of it, and they scratch off their letters as they use them to decrypt. So since it's all random, nothing is reused and stuff. You should read it. So that message is unbreakable. So how do you ensure that you break it if it's unbreakable? And of course, the answer is capture one of the agents, break their kneecaps, and then proceed to find out where the one-time pad is. Nothing is secure. Nothing is perfectly secure. There is no perfect encryption. You can always break encryption by attacking the people involved in it. Another thing you can do is the other most nefarious thing in almost all security attacks, which is the man in the middle, which Alice thinks she's talking to Bob, and Bob thinks he's talking to Alice, but in reality, they're both communicating with malicious Mallory, who is sitting as the man in the middle, taking Alice's message, pretending to be Bob, by forwarding those messages to Bob, and basically forging the signatures in such a way that that everybody thinks she is who she claims she is. So she's just basically eavesdropping on the messages, possibly every so often altering one. And that alteration has to be subtle, because again, you can't reveal what you're doing. Okay. Almost all of internet communications these days is based off the fact that you have to trust somebody. But security is based off the fact that basically no computer is secure unless it's turned off, unplugged from the internet, and buried in concrete underneath the seafloor. Possibly. I ain't joking. I ain't got you properly paranoid enough. Seriously. Anybody know what Van Eck freaking is? You don't know, you are not nearly paranoid enough about anything. Van Eck freaking is it's a theoretical way, well, kind of in theory because nobody's admitted to really using it, to basically read your message, read your computer screen by the radiation emissions coming off of it. Because, you know, your computer emits energy and you can read that energy. And that's a signal. And I could. I mean, yeah, but what if you've got a state level budget? And you've got a target you really need to read. We're just, again, and is this realistic? Probably not. But like, this is kind of the level of paranoia that people think about when they get really into security. So anyway, solitaire encryption, the idea here is that pretty much everything that we've discussed uses uses machines. But what if you're traveling into the People's Republic of I oppress my people and you don't want to have your messages read? And you're worried that basically they might, you know, install something funky on your computer. Okay, and the answer is that, well, if you can't use a machine, you got to basically make one yourself. And you got to use it in some way that is innocuous. And that's where solitaire encryption comes in, because you're using a deck of cards as your machine for generating your random keys. Okay, so for every letter, basically what we'll do is that we will manipulate the deck of cards in such a way that we will draw a card and that card will be our key. And it's a wonderful coincidence, by the way. And again, the key is the amount that we're going to change that letter. And so two key factors here. First off, we start off with our deck shuffled in a specific manner that we have memorized beforehand. And the second is that the person I'm communicating with knows about this method and has memorized that same configuration so that they can reproduce the steps. But I manipulate the deck in a very specific manner. I take 5 steps to I manipulate the deck doing some cuts and some shuffling in a very specific way and some swapping of cards to generate random numbers, and to use that as a random number generator. And it's this amazing coincidence that we've got 26 letters in the English alphabet, and we have 52, which is 2 times 26 cards, regular cards in a standard playing deck. Here we're going to just use half the deck to make it easier to simplify it a bit rather than using the whole deck. And then we'll use the 2 jokers as kind of values to figure out where we're going to be starting and swap and stopping and doing these kind of hand manipulations. Now, this isn't perfect. There's actually cryptographic weaknesses in this method, but hey, it's better than just communicating in plain text. You know, all you do is you just send these random numbers as part of your message, and then your compatriot would know how to decrypt it so that he isn't picked up by the I don't know, People's Protection Army or whatever appropriate dystopian name they're going to be using, you know. So there's a couple values here, and I've linked a video on how this manipulation goes. But there's 5 steps, and they're each going to be called by the get key method, which given your deck and its current in its current configuration will return an int, which is the key you will use to use for a single letter, right? So doing all these 5 steps gives you a single encrypted letter, which is a lot. But then, I mean, the computer can do it fast. So you do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, right? Now, some of these are a real pain in the butt if you were going to use them, if we were trying to do this on an array. Let's take a look at step 3. This is my personal favorite. Do the triple cut, which is that everything that's above the first joker goes to the bottom of the deck, and everything below the second joker goes to the top. Triple cut, you basically take everything above the first, you basically identify where the jokers are in your small deck, and you just swap everything above from on the top of that joker pile with everything on the bottom. Okay, so right here we're in this configuration. So the jokers are represented by the numbers 27 and 28. So notice we've got 1, 4, 7, 10, 13. And then after we do step 3, they'll be moved over here. And then everything below 5, 8, 11, 14, 30, all the way to 26 gets moved here. So it swaps them around. Now this looks like a horrific operation to do if you're using an array list, right? But fortunately, we're working with a deck of cards represented by a circular linked list. And boy, does that make our job so much easier, because here's the trick with linked lists. Every item in a linked list, every node in a linked list is its own linked list. That means that you can, in kind of a theory, kind of atomic level, that means you can think of you can split up linked lists like it's nobody business. They're good at being split up. Example of this is, well, let's take a look at how I would do step 3. The way I would do step 3, and I'll write this in a second, is that I would create a temporary top of the deck as well as a middle and a bottom, right? So the top is going to be everything in the deck that comes above the jokers, okay? So what I'm going to do is, and then remember, my jokers in this case, in this scenario, are the numbers 27 and 28. So while so I'm going to look at my deck, and again, we're doing these individual manipulations. So working on individual cards, like it's an actual deck of cards. While deck is dot get 0 is, while the thing at index 0 is not 27, and it's also not 28. And I'm sorry I'm taking up so much of your work time for this, but I'm trying to make sure that everybody gets the information they need in this. So while it's not 20 and 7, while it's not a joker, I'm going to take that card, I'm going to remove that card from our deck. Dot remove index 0, and for a linked list, this is a constant time operation as well, because removing the head of a linked list is no problem whatsoever. And then top dot add. Move it to the back. So I'm basically going, okay, is this a joker? No. 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 Is this a joker? Yes. So I'm going to stop. This is the top of the deck. Got it? And then I can do that for the middle, the joker and everything between them. The two jokers and everything between them, they can go into their own thing, and then into their own pile, and then everything, all the remaining cards can go into a third pile. So I can have 3 temporary linked lists and empty out my deck. Okay, and then I can recombine them into one additional pile back into our normal deck of cards, right? Now, this kind of atomic operation of doing adds and removes only takes O of n time, because we're going to be touching each card exactly once, essentially. Sorry, twice. Once when we're splitting them up, and once when we're putting it back together. But it makes the entire so once they're split into 3 piles, I can take the bottom pile and add that back into the deck first, making it so it becomes a lot more straightforward if you start working with a circular linked list by doing add and remove operations. And part of the reason I want to bring this up was because I saw people in Discord chatting about how to solve these problems, and I wanted to make sure I intervened before you dug yourself into a corner. All right. So anyway, paranoia and bloodshed. Great start to a Monday, right? I'm not getting nearly enough laughs, which makes me wonder if I've horrified / traumatized people. So anyway, I am done with basically sharing what I need to share.